What's up, Windwalkers, and welcome to my Season 2 guide for The War Within. We've got a heck of a lot to go over, and I'll try to keep this as concise as possible, but this video is still going to be quite a lot to take in. Luckily, you have a whole week before Season 2 actually releases, so that's a bunch of time to get to grips with all the new talents, builds, gear targets, and pretty much everything you need to before Mythic Plus and the raid doors open. First off, let's talk content. Similarly to my comprehensive guide, I'm going to break down this video into some main chapters. Chapter 1 will be looking at the actual changes that have been made to Windwalker and published by Blizzard in their patch notes. Chapter 2 will then jump straight into Season 2's stats, gear, consumables, basically everything you need to know to get your character min-maxed. Following this, we'll take a little detour and look at the Monk talent tree. Not a lot of new ground to go over here, but there's still some tech worth mentioning, specifically for Mythic Plus. Next up, we'll be taking a look at the Shadopan hero talent, single target builds, AOE builds, rotations, and general rules. Penultimately, we'll go through the Conduit of the Celestial hero talent, which, quite frankly, will be the largest and most in-depth section of the entire guide, which will follow the exact same structure as the Shadopan section. If there's only one section in this entire video that you watch, it should be this one, as quite frankly, Conduit the Celestial is going to see play. Finally, the video will close with a conclusion and some parting thoughts and takeaways for this season as a whole. Before we hop into the actual changes coming in Season 2, I wanted to note that this guide won't go over the fundamentals of how to play Windwalker, as this has generally stayed the same as what I go through in the comprehensive guide. So, if you're new to Windwalker, and you're curious about how to play the spec, I recommend checking out the initial chapter of that video first, and then hopping back over to this one. There will be some areas in this video where I refer back to that guide, but I'll always let you know when that happens and where to find what I'm talking about. Finally, I just wanted to give a huge thanks to the Windwalker team of Pika Serenity. They've been extremely helpful with answering any questions I've had and openly discussing their theory crafting and own guide ideas with me prior to releasing their guide. Pika Serenity is a really informative website for any monk that wants to learn through written guides. I mean, quite frankly, that's where I learned to play Windwalker. And on top of that, they have an amazing Discord server that's always available to any questions you may have. Right, so without further ado, let's check out the changes coming in Season 2 then. Jumping straight into the patch notes themselves, you can see right away that there was a significant amount of changes made to Windwalker. And on a whole, they're pretty decent, and there isn't really much to complain about. Wait, what the hell is that?
You can't keep getting away with it!
Okay, joking aside, I'm happy with pretty much every single change they've made here. I've been playing on the PTR for the past month as every single change was brought in, and even the ones I initially had grievances with, eventually they grew on me. Because there's a lot to cover here, I'm going to try to go through the changes systematically, in a way where changes tie into each other, rather than a best to worst. Alright, let's go. Spinning Crane Kick and Mark of the Crane. Starting off with what is probably the most controversial change of them all, Blizzard have removed Mark of the Crane, a staple Windwalker mechanic for the past 9 years, in a very nonchalant manner. Rest in peace, Mark of the Crane. I actually won't miss you. Moving on. Now, if you aren't familiar with Mark of the Crane, it was a mechanic where Spinning Crane Kick could stack up to 5 times for each new target you hit with either Tiger Palm, Rising Sun Kick, or Blackout Kick. Back in the day, this meant a lot of tab targeting to apply stacks, but in The War Within Season 1, it was honestly really easy to achieve through talent nodes. So let's ignore the skill expression debate for a second and look at some raw numbers. Each Mark of the Crane stack gave Spinning Crane Kick an 18% increase in damage, maxing out at 90%. This meant it was at its strongest facing 5 targets or more, and weakest facing 1. Well, with Mark of the Crane scrap, Blizzard gave Spinning Crane Kick an 80% damage increase across the board, and called it a day. That's kinda nuts.
Come on, let's get nuts.
Not only is it a 52% damage increase in single target, the only target amount it's worse off in is 5 or more. Now, overall, this is a very small effect on our general priority. However, the main difference is the higher priority for Spinning Crane Kick with 2 Dance of the Chi-Ji stacks procs at lower target counts. But we'll go over that more in later chapters. Slicing Winds. Now, along with the removal of Mark of the Crane, we're also saying farewell to Darting Hurricane, a talent which saw about a week of play before getting nerfed in Season 1 and now getting scrapped. Cool. In its place, we have a brand new talent called Slicing Winds. Taken directly from Plunderstorm, this is a charge-up AoE ability. Note, however, that the damage stays the same no matter how long you charge up for. The charge is primarily for movement and making distance. One upside of Slicing Winds is that it has no chi cost and is just a 30-second cooldown. However, the downside of the ability is that it takes the place of Flying Serpent Kick. Now, initially in PTR testing, I would misclick this a lot, as I was so used to Flying Serpent Kick being on the same keybind. But eventually you do get the hang of it, and honestly, the loss of Serpent Kick's mobility becomes kind of non-existent. The ideal way to use this ability is to one-tap it, so you only move a slight distance, but it can be held down to catch a wider area of targets. It has great synergy with Conduit of the Celestials, that we'll go over in a bit, but you do need to be careful using it. Early on in a pull, it can easily result in stealing aggro. Part of the Jade Serpent. The changes made to this talent node in the Celestial Conduit hero tree cannot be understated. In Season 2, when Heart of the Jade Serpent is triggered, it decreases the cooldown of Fists of Fury, Strike of the Windlord, Rising Sun Kick, Whirling Dragon Punch, and Flying Serpent Kick / Slicing Winds by 75% for 6 seconds. The channel time for Fists of Fury is also reduced by 50%. Now, although the heart window was reduced from 8 to 6 seconds, what really changed about this talent is its trigger. In both Season 1 and 2, the Celestial Conduit passive ability Unity Within and Strike of the Windlord both activate the heart window. However, in Season 1, Strike of the Windlord required you to spend 45 chi prior to it activating. In Season 2, the chi requirement is completely gone, and every Strike of the Windlord activates this window. This is insane. Not only is the hero talent now focused around constant mini burst windows, but it's just much more fast-paced. I'll go into more detail about how you play around these windows in the Conduit of the Celestial chapter, but I'll say it now. This change is one of, if not, the key reason this hero talent will see competitive play in both Raiding and Mythic Plus. Xuan's Bond. If you ever used Conduit of the Celestial in Season 1, you'll know the frustration of this talent falling short of lining up with your 1 minute 30 Conduit when there were periods of not attacking a target. In Season 1, this talent reduced the cooldown of Xuan by 0.25 seconds for each ability that activated our Mastery combo strike. A huge quality of life change in Season 2 is that the talent now has a flat 1 minute and 30 second cooldown, which perfectly lines up every time with Celestial Conduit. However, this change was so good that it has broader applications, and we'll see play for Shadopan as well, with a little help from a trinket we'll go over in Chapter 2.
It's all in the cards.
No, get out of here, shoo! Get off the screen. Not yet. Soon. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, Last Empress Capacitor and Power of the Thunder King. Now, these two talent nodes got a huge buff in Season 2, and are now looking like decent talents to run for both single target and AoE respectively. Last Empress Capacitor stacks up to 20 charges of Crackling Jade Lightning. In Season 1, each stack you gained gave you 200% additional damage, but in Season 2, each stack gains 400% increased damage. Lightning kinda goes crazy. Although Power of the Thunder King technically got nerfed from doing 100% damage to 80% damage to 4 additional targets, the capacitor buffs go above and beyond in making up the deficit. However, these talents are going to come with a couple of rules, so get your notebooks out and get ready to jot these down. Rule 1. When playing Conduit of the Celestials, you don't want to cast Last Empress Capacitor during a heart window in single target. However, when in multi-target and running Power of the Thunder King, it's so important not to overstack that popping it during your heart window is more valuable than holding it. The only exception to this rule is if you're holding Crackling Jade Lightning to align with ad spawns and delaying the ability to do so. In constant multi-target situations like Mythic Plus, this is generally not worth it, but in raid encounters, for example, delaying a Crackling Jade Lightning for up to 20 seconds can be worth it. Rule 2. If you're in a multi-target situation, if your major cooldowns like Storm Earth and Fire, Strike of the Windlord for Gale Force, and Xuen have 10 seconds until they're back up, then it's actually worth delaying the Crackling Jade Lightning cast to get the damage amps from these. Rule 3. When playing Conduit in single target, the opposite applies to Rule 2, where you actually want to spend your stacks before going into your burst cycle. If you have 15 or more stacks, spend them to avoid massively overcapping them. So yeah, quite a lot of caveats with these talent nodes, but honestly, it's not as complex as it sounds, I promise. Finally, just so that you're aware, moving during the cast will completely cancel it, and you'll lose all of the damage you've been saving up. So make sure your feet are firmly planted before going full on Emperor Palpatine mode, yeah? Ordered Elements. So, Ordered Elements got a slight tweak in how it activates in Season 2. In Season 1, after you cast Storm, Earth and Fire, anytime you cast Rising Sun Kick during the ability's uptime, you would get a 7-second buff, reducing chi costs of all abilities by 1. In Season 2, this has been changed to activate the moment you use Storm, Earth and Fire instead, and lasts for the duration of the ability. In AoE situations, this is going to feel better, as you're no longer forced to Rising Sun Kick straight away to gain the buff. However, you do lose the ability to slingshot the buff by using Rising Sun Kick as Storm, Earth and Fire ends, to gain an extra 7 seconds of the window outside of Storm, Earth and Fire. Generally speaking, this is a slight buff in AoE and a slight nerf in single target. However, it does feel a lot better in AoE. Storm, Earth and Fire. Now, I need to note here that Storm, Earth and Fire doesn't actually have any changes, but because there's been so many other changes that have made an impact on this ability, it's kind of worth mentioning here. When it comes to expending your second Storm, Earth and Fire in Season 2, you're going to want to be getting it off during Bloodlust to benefit from any large haste bonus. Beforehand, the resources from Ordered Elements were needed to minimize downtime, so it generally got used at around the 1 minute mark on most fights, for example. Due to so many additional resources through talent changes, this is just no longer necessary, and should be used to push your big damage window as much as possible. Honestly, on top of this, the removal of Mark of the Crane has pretty much reduced Storm, Earth and Fire to just a damage amp. For better or for worse, it's worth thinking of the ability as such for Season 2. Courageous Impulse and Shadowboxing Threads. Building on the buffs to Blackout Kick midway through Season 1, Courageous Impulse got another big damage increase, going from 200% increased damage all the way up to 350. However, on the other side of the coin, Shadowboxing Treads got a bit of a nerf, where they used to increase damage by 20% in Season 1, now they'll only increase damage by 10%. However, similarly to the nerf to Power of the Thunder King, Courageous Impulse more than makes up the deficit, and Courageous Impulse is going to see play in basically every talent build, single target and AoE, while Shadowboxing Treads is going to make an appearance in AoE builds. Mastery. I'm going to touch briefly on Mastery here, but I'll talk a bit more about it when we get to stats in the next chapter. In Season 2, Mastery effectiveness of combo strikes is being increased by 35%. Blizzard even state that they're doing this to push it as a stat, and quite frankly, it's worked. This is just a glimpse of what our baseline Mastery looks like compared across the two seasons. Generally speaking, this is another key reason that Conduit the Celestial is going to see a lot of play next season. Dance of the Wind. Finally, let's take a gander at the only change coming to the Monk talent tree next season. Dance of the Wind is getting a complete rework, and honestly, it's a pretty good one. In Season 1, it gave us 10% dodge chance on an attack that scaled by 10% every 4 seconds up to 90%. When it was procced, it would go back down to 10% and start again. The new dance does the exact same thing, except instead of dodge chance, it reduces physical damage taken. The changes basically give Windwalker a passive 10% physical damage reduction, with an additional stacking buff of 10% each stack, up to 9, every 4 seconds, giving you a total of 91% physical damage reduction at max stacks. This is low-key insane. This talent has the potential to give Windwalker much better survivability in comparison to its iteration from Season 1. But do remember that the moment you take a direct physical hit, the stacks completely drop off and the stacking cycle begins anew. A good way to visualize this is without the buff, the target hits me for 900,000 damage. With a full buff, it only hits me for 90,000 damage. So, theoretically, if you have full stacks and you're hit for 10 million damage, you'd only get hit for 1 million. If you're hit for 100 million, you'd only be hit for 10 million. If you're hit for 1,000 million, and there we have it. All of the patch notes changed for Windwalker in Season 2. There was quite a lot to go through, but it all kind of feeds into the upcoming chapters. Speaking of upcoming chapters, I think it's about time we actually looked at gearing in Season 2. So, let's get to it. Starting with stats, which we touched on a bit in Chapter 1, there is going to be a little shake-up. If we take a look at our stats in Season 1, there is a clear outlier, and that was haste, while the other 3 secondaries were kind of left in the dirt. Well, in Season 2, that is somewhat changing. Now, before you look into this image too much, this is just meant to be a demonstration of Season 2 stat balances, so don't take the gear into consideration. We're just going to take a look at the stats as a representation rather than a fixed number you need to get. We can clearly see that Mastery and Haste are running the show, with Crit and Burst kind of eating the dust. So when it comes to stats, Agility is still king, no questions asked. But with secondary stats, generally speaking, Mastery and Haste are about on par with each other, with Crit and Burst struggling. This is predominantly due to the coefficient of our Mastery in Season 2, along with a shift to Conduit of the Celestials in a large amount of content. This hero talent really likes Mastery. It likes it so much that in terms of min-maxing, you'll actually want a bit more Mastery than Haste when running this hero talent, but a bit more Haste than Mastery when running Shadopan. The only caveat to this would be if you're pushing pretty high keystones, then versatility would gain some value so that you can achieve needed survivability. At the end of the day, whilst you gear or get new pieces of gear, always sim yourself. If you're not quite sure on how to do this, I actually have a guide within a guide for this, so you can refer to that and I've linked it in the description. Moving on to gear, it makes sense to go over the tier set first. This tier, our 2 set is going to give our spells a chance to activate Winning Streak, which increases the damage of Rising Sun Kick and Spinning Crane Kick by 3%, stacking up to 10 times. However, Rising Sun Kick and Spinning Crane Kick have a 15% chance to remove the buff, and the stacks are always removed once they reach max. Our 4 set has Fists of Fury apply 1 stack of Winning Streak when cast, and 1 when the channel completes, as well as gaining an 8% stack damage increase when Winning Streak is removed. So basically it's a Rising Sun Kick, Spinning Crane Kick, Fist of Fury, RNG Fiesta damage buff that doesn't really add anything. Honestly, I get the theme of the season is Gamba, but this is pretty mid gameplay wise. However, compared to the Season 1 tier set, it's significantly stronger. The 2 set is worth 1.7% increased damage in single target, and the 4 set is worth 5%. So essentially, compared to running no tier, it's a 6.7% increase. As the Season 1 tier set is on the weaker side, it's advised to drop it quite early, even though the Season 2 2-piece is nothing that special. At the end of the day, sim yourself constantly. The best pieces to wear are head, chest, shoulders and hands, as the leg stats are abysmal. But, whilst gearing, it's always better to have a 4 set than not to have a 4 set, even at the expense of them being poorer stats. Finally, to note, there is one change that the tier set actually brings to priority, and that's switching the priority of Rising Sun Kick and Fists of Fury in single target, but I'll go over that a bit later. Moving on to crafted gear, on a whole, embellishments aren't that majorly impactful. However, they do scale with eye level, so you'll still want them. I'm going to go through 3 potentially good crafts you can go for, but they should be assessed on your own personal gear situation. And please bear in mind, this isn't a best to worst list, all 3 have their pros and cons. Number 1, Double Elemental Focusing Lens. This is a decent embellishment that you would likely be crafting on a cloak and wrists. Predominantly, you would want to run these embellishments if you're exclusively interested in single target damage. Although it's not a bad craft, it has less of an impact in AoE situations, so it might not be a best of both worlds craft. Number 2, Double Dusk Thread Lining. This provides early value whilst also remaining strong throughout the patch. Although it is verse, it will provide increased survivability, which is good for progression. You'd want to craft this on a cloak or wrists, but the majority of its value will come from higher eye level crafts later in the season. Number 3, a 2-hander Ascendance Weapon. This is a huge short-term gain once you have access to 2 sparks, and you'll be pairing it with a Writhing Armor Band. However, it can take several weeks to access all of the materials, specifically sparks, to get the full value out of this craft, so it will be severely weaker for early progression. The upside is it will be strong for raid and M+. I would suggest this if you aren't going to be able to get a 2-hander at 678 eye level for whatever reason early on. However, it will be optimal to replace it in the long term. So all 3 are viable options, and it's going to depend heavily on what you're looking to get out of your character. Are you looking for short-term strong single target, moderate long-term single target in AoE, or delayed strong AoE? It's all going to be on a character-by-character basis. Moving on to weapons from M+ and Raid. 2-handers and 1-handers are similar in single target, with 1-handers being slightly stronger. However, in AoE, 2-handers scale significantly better in Season 2. 1-handers also come with the condition of having to take the talent Dual Threat, which can lead to a loss of arguably better talent, but we'll go over that in a bit. Generally speaking, you'll want a 2-hander. At the start of Season 2, your current 636 or 639 1-handers are better than all 2-handers bar 1. If you have access to a 639 Harvester's Interdiction that drops from Arakara, City of Echoes, then I'd suggest using it, as this instantly allows you the freedom to drop Dual Threat for another talent, and it's stronger in AoE. At max eye level, however, the best 2-hander is from Priority of the Sacred Flame. The weapon in question being Glorious Defender's Poleaxe, which you can see quite clearly has some amazing secondary stats that we'll want to be grabbing as soon as possible. Now, this is one of those weapons that you're going to have to get lucky for in the vault, unfortunately. Now, there are 2 2-hander weapons from the raid itself that you might want to be target focusing as you try to get your Priority weapon. The easiest one to acquire will come from Vexy, the Grease Monkey's Shift Stick. A little bit of a harder one to acquire will be the Gigabank Breaker from the One-Armed Bandit. Both of these are decent 2-handers, and if they're eye level upgrades, you're going to want to be equipping them. The only downside is that the stats are not perfect for us. The best 1-handers from the raid, if you want to go for a more single target oriented build, is Gallywix's Iron Thumb, which will likely pair with Capo's Molten Knuckles. These drop from Gallywix and Mugsy respectively. In terms of double 1-handers, I'd only recommend this though if you predominantly care about single target and boss damage. So, as you can see, there is a lot of min-maxing that can actually be done with weapons in Season 2. Eventually, you'll end up with 2 weapon sets that you would use on a per-content basis to truly min-max, but initially, I'd advise trying to get your hands on a 2-hander, as it's better overall in all content. When it comes to trinkets, there are 2 outliers that are best in slot for Windwalker Monks. Eye of Kazan is a perfect stat stick for us. It provides mastery and agility. The only caveat to this is that it's a drop from Gallywix, and just about practically everyone in the entire game wants it. Good luck convincing your raid leader. Secondly, we have none other than...
It's all in the cards.
Ah yes, just on time, it is indeed House of Cards. A 1-minute 30 cooldown trinket that gives us mastery on demand. The changes to Xwen's bond that we went over earlier allow us to line up Celestial Conduit, Xwen, and House of Cards for huge burst windows. It's pretty damn good for Shadopan as well when running Xwen's bond, and will be a must-have for pretty much every Windwalker. An honourable mention whilst trying to pursue these trinkets is the Signet of the Priority. This also drops from Priority, just like the 2-hander, which may make it more accessible early on, and is equally as strong at max level to House of Cards if you're playing Shadopan. As well as this, there are a few delve trinkets you should look out for early on. Spelunker's Waning Candle, Shadowbinding Ritual Knife, and Mechanocore Amplifier are all decent stat sticks, with the Mechanocore Amplifier simming extremely well right now, and Concoction, Kiss of Death, and Quick Wit Candlestick are decent on use. Now for the dishonorable mention. As of making this video, Treacherous Transmitter is still insanely strong.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
If you have access to this, then I'd advise using it to progress until it's inevitably nerfed, which it will be. It's so strong currently that at 639 eye level, it currently beats out any 661 trinket. It's crazy, guys. A final note with trinkets that is worth mentioning is that early in a season, trinket balancing is constantly changing, with some getting stronger and some getting weaker. As of recording, raid trinkets are in a really weak spot, whilst delve trinkets are in a really strong spot, but this has the ability to change at any moment Blizzard-like. So, take this little section with a grain of salt, and make sure to keep an eye on Peak of Serenity's Discord and website for any trinket changes in the coming weeks. Let's talk rings. It'll probably come to no one's surprise that Cyrce's Circlet from patch 11.0.7 is a must-have in its current iteration, even at max eye level in Season 2. The mastery gains from Fathom Dweller's Rune Citron are just too much to pass up on, and until this gets changed, you'll be running this for the foreseeable future. The sockets you'll want to run for this are Stormbringer's Rune Citron, Fathom Dweller's Rune Citron, and Legendary Skipper's Citron. Not much has changed from Season 1 there then. If you haven't got this ring or the sockets for it, for whatever reason, make sure that you do. I even have a guide on how you can get Cyrce's Circlet and the sockets that can help you through what you need to do that you can find in the description. The second ring that you'll want to be after, which will be a little bit more difficult to acquire, is the Jaster's Diamond from Gallywix. It is a great mastery ring with a special effect, but the downside is it drops from Gallywix, and it's a rare drop, so acquiring it may be more difficult than you initially think. If you can't get your hands on this, then a ring with good mastery and haste, or both, is a safe bet. When it comes to socketing, it's always best to sim yourself to find out what is currently best to use with your current character's build. However, you can use the rule of thumb that it's going to be pretty tied to our stat priority initially. A quick Onyx is a safe bet, but as you get more gem slots and more value from using different gem combinations with your Blasphemite, simming will become more crucial. Finally, enchants and consumables. Enchants are pretty much going to be the same as they were in Season 1 for the most part. Cloak, chest, braces, boots, and armor kit are all identical, and this isn't really going to come as a surprise. The main difference is going to lie in the ring enchants, which are going to likely put more of an emphasis on Radiant Mastery and Radiant Haste as your safe bet. But please sim yourself. For weapons, things get a little trickier, and it's going to depend on the content you're running. If running raid content and looking for single target prio damage, then Authority of the Depths is your best choice, as it's been for the whole of Season 1. The alternative option to this comes with high AoE situations, where it may actually be better to run a stat enchant, like Stormrider's Fury, Oathsworn Tenacity, and Authority of Radiant Power. But as I keep mentioning, this is going to be on a character by character basis, so simming yourself for these are crucial. When it comes to consumables, nothing really has changed here. The only thing worth mentioning is that personal food-wise, haste and mastery food is going to be your best option, especially at early eye levels. Otherwise, it's all the same on this page. And that's everything you need to know about gearing for Season 2, essentially. We went through quite a lot there, I know, but it's all pretty damn important. So let's slow things down a bit and take a little detour to the Monk talent tree to talk over a couple of things. So, when it comes to Season 2 and the Monk talent tree, there honestly isn't much to touch on, as there was only 2 real changes to anything in this tree, one of them being Dance of the Wind, which we went through in Chapter 1. As I went rather in depth in my comprehensive guide on the topic, I don't really want to milk this video by going over what I've already previously gone through in that video. I would advise you check out the timestamp section of my comprehensive guide if you want a full run through of this tree and the particular benefits of different talents. The tree you see on the screen right now comes directly from that video and highlights cookie cutter talents already selected. Any talent with a purple or green ring is a situational node, and that's going to greatly depend on the content you're running. However, with that said, I am going to touch on 3 specific situational talents that hold the greatest relevance with the changes in Season 2. Firstly, let's talk Lighter Than Air. This is one of the situational nodes you can choose from in the bottom section of the tree, and I'd argue it's gained value in Season 2. With the loss of Flying Serpent Kick in any build that utilizes Slicing Winds, we've essentially lost a mobility ability. Lighter Than Air can help make up that deficit by giving you an extra pep in your step after you roll. If you don't already use this, then it might be a good idea to get familiar with it, especially if you're struggling with mobility. As well as this, there's a neat little trick you can actually utilize with Lighter Than Air to unlock yourself from Whirling Dragon Punch's animation. You can actually roll mid-animation. Now, the roll won't go off, but Lighter Than Air will trigger, and you can then dash to safety. This is one of those tricks that you won't use that often, but you'll be grateful that you know. especially when you whirl and Dragon Punch with an incoming mechanic and you need to get out at the last second. Pressure points. Now, Paralysis actually got a patch note change, which is kind of cool. It was one of the 2 things in the Monk talent tree that got slightly tweaked. It now requires a small amount of damage to break instead of instantly breaking on damage. A decent quality of life change, but not the real reason I bring up pressure points. This talent allows you to use Paralysis on a target to remove an Enrage effect, and in Season 2 Mythic Plus, there is an extremely large pool of these in comparison to Season 2. So much so, in fact, there are 12 different Enrage effects spanning 7 of the 8 Mythic Plus dungeons. This essentially makes pressure points a must-take talent for Mythic Plus, as the value you get out of this is insane. Detox, the ye old faithful poison and disease effect remover on a minute 8-second cooldown. In Season 2, there are a bunch of poison and disease effects in 3 of the 8 Mythic Plus dungeons. Predominantly, these all come from Theatre of Pain, where this talent is a must-take or trolling source of angle, but it will have its usefulness in Dark Flame Cleft and Motherlode as well. There aren't quite as many situations as Pressure Point is going to get value for, but it is still a valuable talent to take in the right situation. Just to add to this Mythic Plus related section, I've shown it twice now, but there is a really cool Mythic Plus resource made by Zephyrus, where you can see all the dispels in the new dungeons. I'll link it in the description if you want to check it out. It is really useful. And that's it. I told you this would be a short chapter. Well, where there's calm, there tends to be a storm looming. It's time to get into the big stuff, starting off with the Shadopan hero talent. As the next 2 chapters are going to be pretty full on, I'm going to break them down into subsections to try and keep things tidy. Initially, we will have a general overview of the hero talent. Following this, we'll look at single target. This will include talent builds, the opener, and priority. Finally, we'll have a look at AOE, which will also include talent builds, opener, and priority. Kicking things off with the general overview. Now, it might come as a surprise, but out of the 2 hero talents, Shadopan is staying the most faithful to its Season 1 iteration. In fact, there wasn't a single change for the hero talent going into Season 2. Because of this, I will not be going through the fundamentals of Shadopan, as the comprehensive guide covers all of the fundamentals of the hero talent, including the interaction between Flurry Strikes and Wisdom of the Wall. I highly recommend checking this out if you aren't confident in how Shadopan works before we start getting into Season 2 specifics. It's worth noting now that what you might generally notice is that there will be a fair few less flurry discharges in Season 2. This is predominantly because the new talent builds produce more procs that have a higher priority than preventing energy cap. Dance of Chi-Ji is a great example of this, as previously in single target, this wasn't something that would proc at all, because you didn't take it. In Season 2, this will proc a heck of a lot more. As a result, you'll be pressing Spinning Crane Kick more spinning crane kicks lead to less Tiger Palms. That's the gist of it anyway. Because of the increased procs outside of the Wisdom of the Wall Shadow Flurry buff, Tiger Palm will be used significantly less. However, inside the Shadow Flurry buff, it's still important to prevent energy capping at all target counts and getting off more Tiger Palms. Finally, a last note on general overview for Shadopan. In single target, it's not going to be as strong as Conduit the Celestials. All the simulations show the same thing. Conduit is just so strong this tier in its current iteration that Shadopan just can't stack up, so you're more than likely not going to be running this in single target. However, in Mythic Plus, they're pretty on par with each other, so you're more likely to be running either or. Right, Shadopan single target. Before we even get into the choices, let's talk the elephant in the room. When it comes to the best talent builds for Shadopan, there have been some slight changes. Dance of Chi-Ji is now going to be taken due to it dealing 52% increased damage in single target, and on top of that, Strike of the Windlord is gone. At the end of the day, it honestly just comes down to the talent not being able to stack up against other talents that have received changes, or synergize with talents that have received changes. For the most part, this talent tree is pretty locked in when it comes to optimal talents. There are 29 cookie cutter talents, and you'll have the choice of a pair of talents dependent on your gear setup. However, there are 1 or 2 other considerations you can make here. Starting with gear setup. If you're dual wielding, you'll go for dual threat here. I've spoken about this a lot during this video, and it stays true here for any of the talent builds coming up. Dual wield equals dual threat. If you're using a two-hander, however, you'd instead go for Rising Star, giving a bit more power over Rising Sun Kick. Another consideration you can make in single target is situational, and based on if you need Xuan's Bond, A good example of this would be if you're running a 1-minute 30 trinket like House of Cards. If this is the case, then you would drop either Transfer of Power or Xwen's Battle Gear. But generally speaking, this is going to come down to simming, which of the two is better to drop with your character's current setup. It's not as cut and dry. A final choice you can make, but I less so recommend this, is between Energy Burst and Martial Mixture. Now, I would always side with Energy Burst here, as it's a great talent that helps with balancing your energy and chi resource pool in a tier where Inner Peace is no longer taken. However, if you want a higher focus on priority damage with a beefier Tiger Palm and are fine with a bit more downtime, then Martial Mixture is the take. See? That wasn't so bad, right? It's familiar enough to Season 1 with a couple of choices that honestly are pretty cut and dry. But on the other side, there is a bit of a breath of fresh air from repeating the exact same thing for another season. Speaking of the exact same thing, Single Target Opener. It is genuinely the exact same.
Ever get that feeling of deja vu?
I'm not going to go into this too heavily as a result, and instead just walk you through it again like in the comprehensive guide. So this opener should only take you about 8 seconds, it's really fast. You open with a Tiger Palm, straight into Rising Sun Kick, back into Tiger Palm. This builds up acclamation stacks as well as get some hit combos. You then instantly Xuen, Storm Earth and Fire to reset Rising Sun Kick into Tiger Palm and then Fist of Fury. No Strike of the Windlord as I'm not running it, and I finish off with a Whirling Dragon Punch and it's straight back into Priority. Alright, let's move on to Priority. Now this has had a slight retweaking, but it's not as complicated as it looks. I think the best way to go through this is to talk through the priority list from top to bottom as I actually play it out, just so you get an actual feel for it whilst I discuss why certain abilities are in certain spots. So, as funny as it may seem to not take Tiger Palm number 1 for Shadopan, being able to get the crit value for Rising Sun Kick and the chance to reduce the cooldown of Fists of Fury is so valuable in single target with the Xwen's Battle Gear talent buff, it has to be the highest prio. Following this, it's the Shadopan staple, Tiger Palm if you're under 5 chi and about to cap energy. But for any Season 1 player, that's going to be pretty familiar. Spinning Crane Kick with 2 Chi-Ji stacks comes in third. Bear in mind, this is 2 stacks, but you also don't want to be greedy and spamming it when there are other abilities ready to go. If you do run Strike of the Windlord, it's sat in 4th, but right now following the talent build, I'm not running it, so one less thing to worry about. Following this is Whirling Dragon Punch, which is importantly sat below a 2-stack Crane Kick. By using this on 2 stacks, you've essentially stolen a stack from yourself. This will apply for every Season 2 priority list. Don't do it. The new addition of a 20-stack Crackling Jade Lightning sits at 6. It might be worth referring back to those rules we went through earlier on when it comes to this, through intermittent ad spawns. Slicing Winds would then be 7th, but again, not running it in the current talent build, so I can cross that off. Fists of Fury and then Rising Sun Kick come in 8th and 9th. Now it's worth mentioning here that when it comes to Rising Sun Kick and Fists of Fury, you'd actually switch their places depending on if you have the 4 set or not. If you have the 4 set, you follow the priority that I'm going through right now. If you don't, then you'd Rising Sun Kick before you Fists of Fury, just switching their places by 1. Following this is Blackout Kick on 4 Monastery stacks, as you don't want to be overstacking. And then pretty far down we have 1-stack Chi-Ji Spinning Crane Kick, and that just allows you the time to use higher priority abilities before reaching 2 stacks and sending. Finally, the last 3. Chi Burst. I'm not running it right now, so not too much to worry about here. Then a non-fully charged Crackling Jade Lightning, which I won't be using on a target dummy fight, as it won't make sense. And lastly, just a plain old Blackout Kick. It's a pretty safe and standard priority list in comparison to Season 1. There are a few abilities in there that you might not even be taking, but it's always worth mentioning them just in case. Moving on to Shadopan AOE. What you might notice straight away is that this talent build looks rather similar to the single target talent tree that we just went through, and honestly, you'd be right. The changes to Spinning Crane Kick and Blackout Kick talents really made their mark on Shadopan, so much so that the single target and AOE builds are kind of a blink and you'll miss it sort of thing. Once again, there will be no Strike of the Windlord for this build, as just like in single target, there are just too many better talent combinations for Strike to compete. So, slightly different to Shadopan single target, there are actually 28 cookie cutter talents for AOE, and you'll have the choice of 2 pairs of talents dependent on your gear setup and situation. Starting with your gear setup, if dual wielding, you'll want to go for dual threat, similarly to single target. What's unsimilar to single target is the alternative node. It isn't Rising Star this time, as it's just not quite good enough to be baseline for AoE. Instead, it's Xwen's Battle Gear, which is still a Rising Sun Kick related talent. Your second choice is your situational node, and this honestly is player preference depending on what you feel most comfortable with. Brawler's Intensity, which gives Blackout Kick and Rising Sun Kick a bit more power, Drinking Horn Cover, which extends Storm Earth and Fire uptime, or Spiritual Focus, which reduces its cooldown. Fight lengths may play a role in this decision, but generally, it's up to you. Finally, Energy Burst and Martial Mixture. We went over this previously, but once again, Energy Burst for better resource management, and Martial Mixture for more prio damage. Now, let's take a look at the Shadopan AOE Opener, and surprise, surprise, nothing has changed. Let's walk through it relatively quickly. Starting things off, I don't need to Tiger Palm twice because I have 2 chi, so I won't be at less than 4. I Tiger Palm, Xuen, Storm Earth and Fire, straight into another Tiger Palm for a bit more chi, and then Fist of Fury, Rising Sun Kick, Whirling Dragon Punch, simple. You'll be very familiar with this. Now for Priority. Funnily enough, it's rather similar to Single Target, but that's kind of a recurring theme here. There are a few key differences though. Let's run through it while I play it to the best of my ability in the background. A familiar sight at Prio 1 is Tiger Palm if you have under 5 chi and you're about to cap on energy. Nothing crazy to go over here. Next up is Spinning Crane Kick with 2 stacks of Chi. We went through this in Single Target, but the goal here is to spend it before it overcaps without over spamming it and not using your other abilities. Rising Sun Kick into Whirling Dragon Punch comes next. This is a pretty sweet combo, and it's almost instinctive at this point for Windwalkers to press it in this order. This doesn't have to be in direct succession, you can have abilities in between the Rising Sun Kick and the Whirling Dragon Punch. Strike of the Windlord would be 4th, but once again, I'm not running it here. Moving up the ranks for AoE is Slicing Winds. I'm not running it in this current best talent build, but it's pretty high up because it does a ton of damage, has a semi-long cooldown, and you want that Gale Force value from Strike when using it. 6th is Crackling Jade Lightning with a caveat of not overcapping. On a target dummy, I'm only really going to fire it at full stacks, but in Mythic Plus, things aren't always such a controlled environment. Refer back to the golden rules when it comes to this ability. 7th is Fist of Fury, pretty standard here. 8th might surprise you though. It's an unpowered Spinning Crane Kick if you have maximum chi and all higher priority spells are on cooldown, or you don't meet the requirements. 9 is Rising Sun Kick with Xwen's Battle Gear. This is actually relevant here if you aren't dual wielding, but it is rather far down the prio list. 10th is Blackout Kick with 2 stacks and not being close to chi cap, as you don't want to overcap chi with this. Next up is Spinning Crane Kick at any chi amount, followed by Chi Burst, which I'm not currently running, and finally a plain old Blackout Kick. So overall it's not too unfamiliar, but there is a bit more focus on Spinning Crane Kick with 3 mentions on this list. Just like Single Target, there are a few abilities in there that you might not even be taking, but it's always worth mentioning them just in case you want to mix it up a bit, or things change. And there we have it, that Shadopan done and dusted. Honestly, it's super similar to what it was previously in Season 1, so I don't think you'll have that much trouble picking it up. On the other hand, we are coming to the final chapter of the video, filled with a lack of similarity and a lot going on. Let's talk Conduit of the Celestials. Just like with Shadopan, I'm going to try and keep things tidy here. Initially, we'll have a general overview of the hero talent. Following this, we'll have a look at Single Target. This will include talent builds, the opener, and the priorities, plural. Finally, we'll have a look at AoE, which will also include talent builds, the opener, and priorities. Kicking off with general overview. This is going to be quite different to Shadopan, as there is a lot to go through. In terms of the fundamentals to Conduit of the Celestials, nothing has really changed from when I did the comprehensive guide during Season 1. So if you want a full hero talent refresher course, I'd watch that section first and then come back to this. The major change to the hero talent that we already went through in Chapter 1 are the changes to Heart of the Jade Serpent. This completely changes how the hero talent plays, with a lot of burst windows, and cooldown reduction keeping it super fast paced and engaging. A key concept to follow when playing this build is that because Strike of the Windlord and Unity Within, the proc from Celestial Conduit, both activate Heart of the Jade Serpent, you don't want to be overlapping these windows. As the buff length doesn't increase, it will just reset. For maximum cooldown efficiency, this leads to the following cycle when both abilities are up. Strike of the Windlord into a Heart window, into Celestial Conduit, into a heart window, into Strike of the Windlord, into a heart window. Now, before we get into some golden rules for playing this hero talent, it's worth mentioning some of the issues with the hero talent. Right now, there is a pretty major bug that exists with the hero talent where Unity Within will occasionally not trigger at the end of a Celestial Conduit cast. As a result, you won't get your heart window. This is pretty detrimental, so it's strongly advised to activate Unity Within yourself as close to the channel ending as possible to avoid this bug. Additionally, there's another bug, and this one is arguably worse. This is where Conduit will just completely cancel itself after its initial tick, and for this one, unfortunately, there is no fix. Just 2 things you should be aware of. Okay, rule time. Rule 1. Strike of the Windlord should only be used when 2 requirements are met. Requirement 1. Fist of Fury will become available within the next 6 seconds, so that it's within the heart window. And requirement 2 is that no Heart of the Jade Serpent window is currently running. Pretty straightforward rule to follow. Rule number 2. Celestial Conduit should always be cast at the very end of a Strike of the Windlord heart window, so that it benefits from the full effects of Gale Force. The ideal time to do this is with 1 second left on the Strike heart window, so there are 5 seconds of Gale Force still running. But it also allows you to benefit from Invoker's Delight and Storm Earth and Fire, so it is pretty important. Finally, the 3rd rule. Fists of Fury is vital to cast inside a heart window, as mentioned in Rule 1, as it's a huge portion of its value. However, you don't want to hold Fists of Fury for Strike of the Windlord. You want to be holding Strike of the Windlord for Fists of Fury. You also want to make sure that you align your first Fist of Fury in a heart cycle with Xuen. So, if Fist of Fury becomes available, and Xuen has a cooldown of less than 15 seconds, then you delay your fists. This situation should rarely happen if you're using fists on cooldown, but do be aware of it. Okay, so that's the general overview of the hero talent, and some rules out of the way. Let's now take a look at single target. Just like with Shadopan, Dance of the Chi-Ji is now going to be taken due to it dealing 52% increased damage in single target. But the big difference is you are taking Strike of the Windlord. I mean, it's kind of important as it activates your heart windows. For the most part, this talent tree is pretty locked in when it comes to optimal talents. There are 28 cookie cutter talents, however, things get a little bit more complicated compared to Shadopan. Just like with Shadopan, you will have the choice of 2 pairs of talents depending on your situation and gear setup, starting with your gear setup. It'll come to no surprise, but if you're dual wielding, you'll go for dual threat. However, if you're using a 2-hander, it's actually Last Empress Capacitor you take instead. With situational choice nodes, this is where things get complicated. If you're in a pure single target fight, you take Fury of Xuen. However, if ads spawn intermittently, like Vexy or Rick Reverb, then you'll take Power of the Thunder King. Have you noticed why this might be a little bit more complicated? If you're running dual threat, well then you aren't running Last Empress Capacitor, right? Let's make this easier to visualize with a table then, shall we? All cleared up? Awesome, let's check out the opener then. At face value, the opener kind of looks like a priority list, but I promise it's not that complicated. You've got to remember that once you hit Strike of the Windlord, you're in the heart window. So you need to make sure you get the rest of the abilities cast and Celestial Conduit channeling within 5 seconds. So let's walk through it. So for anyone that's played Shadopan, this opener is going to seem really familiar for the first half. Tiger Palm, Rising Sun Kick, Tiger Palm, into Xuen, Storm Earth and Fire, Rising Sun Kick, Strike of the Windlord. This is where things now change. You're suddenly in a heart window. You instantly Fist of Fury, followed by a Tiger Palm to get more chi, Rising Sun Kick and Whirling Dragon Punch. It's also worth noting that if you proc a second stack of Chi-Ji during this opener, you want to send it instead of Whirling Dragon Punch. It doesn't happen every time, but it definitely can happen. I then finished the sequence with a Celestial Conduit cast at 1 second left on my heart window. As I didn't have enough haste, there was no time to go for another Fist of Fury. It's super important you get these abilities cast out as fast as possible as time is ticking. Alright, now for priority. Priority for Conduit is going to be split into 2. 1 priority when outside a heart window, and 1 priority when in a heart window. It sounds a bit confusing, but it is important to understand. Remember, with a heart window, a load of your abilities get their cooldown time reduced, so you want to be getting these cast so you get value. I'm going to walk through the heart window first and demonstrate it in action so you can see what I mean by getting value. So I open my heart window with a Strike of the Windlord and instantly go into first priority Fists of Fury. As you can see, I don't have enough chi to cast anything of a higher priority, so I quickly Tiger Palm, Rising Sun Kick into a Whirling Dragon Punch following the priority order. You can see just how short a heart window is and how few abilities you can actually cast in there. Let's do another example of following the priority during the heart window. So I start off straight away with a Strike of the Windlord into Fists of Fury. I then Tiger Palm for a bit of energy, Rising Sun Kick into Whirling Dragon Punch, and then at the last second I finish off with a Spinning Crane Kick because I'm on 2 stacks and I don't want to overstack. Realistically, you aren't getting that many abilities in during this window, so priority is super important. Alright, so now we've gone through and understand the priority of the heart window, let's look at the priority outside of the heart window. You just actively run through Conduit. Strike of the Windlord to activate a heart window is number 1. It's important to use this as your initial activator, so that if you have Conduit ready to go afterwards, it benefits from Gale Force. Conduit follows at number 2, for pretty much the reasons I just mentioned, and now we go into pure priority outside of setting up the window. A Rising Sun Kick with Xuan's Battle Gear would be your number 1 prio outside of activating a window. However, we don't currently run it in single target, so don't worry about this too much at the moment. Following this is Tiger Palm, if below 5 chi and about to energy cap. You may notice Tiger Palm was rather low during the heart window. This is because you ideally want to be doing your heavy hitters then, rather than trying to build up chi. This is the time to be building up chi and prep for the next window. Next up we have Spinning Crane Kick with 2 chi-G stacks. 2 is the important number here, so that you don't overstack, but you also don't greed with chi-G and actively avoid pressing other abilities. Whirling Dragon Punch follows up after this. Once again, it's because it gives you a stack of Chi-G, so this avoids overcapping. A max stack Crackling Jade Lightning 6th and 7th. I'm pure single target right now and dual wielding, so I'm not currently running this. Slicing Winds follows, but once again, not running it as it isn't optimal in single target. We then get to Fist of Fury and Rising Sun Kick in that order. Blackout Kick at 4 Monastery stacks to avoid overcapping is 11. A single Chi-G Crane stack is Saturn 12th, for if you have nothing better to press at the time. Following this is Chi Burst, which I'm not currently running, and then in the final 2 spots we have an unfully stacked Crackling Jade Lightning, and finally a plain old Blackout Kick. So you can see that Conduit is a fine balance of heart window and non-heart window priorities that you need to mesh together to get the most out of the spec. It is crucial that you follow the rules discussed in the general overview, and misaligning Celestial Conduit, mistiming fists, or overlapping windows can lead to a large damage loss. Hopefully, you're not completely freaked out, because now it's time to check out Conduit AOE. For Conduit AOE, there's actually a few builds you can go, and it actually makes more sense to walk through these full builds and talk about their strengths. Each build will have the same 28 cookie cutter talents with 2 chosen talents based on gear setup and situation. We'll look at the dual threat build first. Because you're locked into dual threat and you only have 1 more talent slot to pick, Last Emperor's Capacitor and Power of the Thunder King side of the tree are not really the option. Instead, going for Slicing Winds. This isn't the strongest AoE build, but Slicing Winds is a good talent that synergizes well with Heart Windows as it gets its cooldown reduced. Now, let's look at two-hander builds. A two-hander gives you a lot more freedom. Because of this, there'll be a few more variations of builds without the restrictions of dual threat. Last Emperor's Capacitor and Power of the Thunder King are good talents and strong options in situations where there is a lot of AoE and cleave. This is a strong Mythic Plus build. A competing build for AoE is one where instead, you pick up Slicing Winds and Fury of Xuen. This provides a good amount of extra single target prio damage, whilst also having some high AoE damage. Finally, you could go for Xuan's Battle Gear and Slicing Winds. This still allows you to keep some strong AoE damage and synergy in Slicing Winds, but what it also gives you is a bunch of funnel damage, which may be beneficial with taking out higher prio targets. Just be aware, if you want to go for this good prio target AoE build, then it is actually better to drop Transfer of Power and instead put a point into Fury of Xuen. All 4 of these builds are completely viable in Mythic Plus and AoE situations, and it's completely up to you what you want to go for, based on your preference and situation. Honestly, it's probably one of the best things about Conduit AoE. There is a ton of choice. Okay, now onto the opener. This opener is so simple, so I'm just going to quickly run through it and then get to priority. Honestly, all it is Tiger Palm again if you're below 4 chi, into Xuen, Storm Earth and Fire, Strike of the Windlord, and you go in your heart window. It's that simple. It's a little bit of a chi build up, so your heart window gets off to a good start, but other than that, it's super simple and you're just setting up for that window. So, just like with single target priority, I'm going to split this into heart window and outside of heart window. So let's talk through it whilst I try my best to play this window out. 2 stacks of Spinning Crane Kick is top, and for a good reason. It's super easy to gain chi stacks during a heart window, and the last thing you want to do is overcap. so getting this sent out as soon as possible is vital. Crackling Jade Lightning at 20 stacks sits just below it. Now this is going back to the golden rule of Last Emperor's Capacitor. Because you gain so many stacks during a heart window, it's crucial to spend this to avoid overstacking by a ton and losing a lot of value. Fist then follows. As we discussed in the Conduit rules, you need to get this out during a heart window. It's too valuable not to. Next is any form of spinning crane kick if you have 30G stored from Chi Explosion, and a Fist of Fury about to come up. Jade Ignition stacks are generated when you hit targets with Fists of Fury. The more targets, the more you generate. You can easily get 30 stacks with one Fist of Fury in a Mythic Plus, so using Fists while sitting on 30 stacks is a major damage loss in AoE. Next up we have Rising Sun Kick with Xwen's Battle Gear buff. I'm not currently running this, so not necessary for me right now. Following this is the old faithful combination of Rising Sun Kick into Whirling Dragon Punch. This doesn't have to be in direct succession, you can have abilities in between the Rising Sun Kick and the Whirling Dragon Punch. Down in 7th we have Slicing Winds, which may feel low, but you're going to get this off pretty much every time, so don't worry too much. Next we finally see a Tiger Palm, followed by a 2-stack Blackout Kick. In 10th we have a 1-stack Chi-Ji. It's super important not to press a 1-stack Chi-Ji early, as you only have 6 seconds for your window. It's crucial you get more important abilities out first. And bam presto, that's the AoE heart window. There's a bit more going on there than in single target, but there's quite a fair few of those that you can actively avoid by prepping your heart window well. Okay, finally, let's look at AoE Priority outside a heart window. For the most part, you might notice that this is actually rather similar to the single target priority, with just a couple of reshuffles. Let's crack through it whilst I try my best to get this priority right. Strike of the Windlord to activate heart window is 1. It's important to use this as your activator first, so that if you have Conduit ready to go afterwards, it benefits from Gale Force. Conduit follows at number 2, for pretty much the reason I just mentioned above. The highest prior outside of using an ability to activate your heart window is a 2-stack spinning crane kick with Chi-Ji. Insanely important not to overstack Chi-Ji for Conduit AOE. Next up is the infamous Tiger Palm if less than 5 Chi and about to cap. Chi is pretty important, so it's no surprise it sat so high up. A 20-stack Crackling Jade Lightning is in 5th, and it makes sense to be high up to avoid having it overlap with heart windows where possible. I'm not running it here, so you won't be seeing me zapping these dummies anytime soon. Slicing Winds just behind, and I am running this. Pretty high up in the order, and it makes sense to get it out as often as possible, especially with the constant cooldown it gets during heart windows. Rising Sun Kick into Whirling Dragon Punch sits just below. This doesn't have to be in direct succession, you can have abilities in between the Rising Sun Kick and the Whirling Dragon Punch. In 8th we have Fists of Fury. A solo Rising Sun Kick sits below Fist, and then we have Blackout Kick with 2 stacks of Blackout Effect, which is a great way to gain Chi and keep resources up whilst also doing neat damage. Down near the bottom is a 1-stack Spinning Crane Kick. No real surprises here, as it gives you time to use higher prior abilities without the risk of overstacking. Then we have Chi Burst, which I'm not running, and in 13th we have a plain Spinning Crane Kick, followed by a plain Blackout Kick. A button you'll only want to be pressing if you have no other choice. And there we have it. That's the complete walkthrough of Conduit AOE, and Conduit as a whole, to be honest. Now, before I get into final thoughts for the season, I get that Conduit sounds like it's a lot and might seem overwhelming, but take it from someone that's played a bunch on the PTR. It's really fun, it's really engaging, and it's really learnable. Once you lock down your heart windows, everything just kind of falls into place, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it takes practice. But that's what week 1's for, right? Anyway, let's wrap up this video with a quick little section on my final thoughts. So, final thoughts for the season. On a whole, I'm super optimistic about the changes that were brought to Windwalker in Season 2 of The War Within. A lot of small quality of life changes go a long way in making a big impact, and we can see that in Conduit the Celestials and the powerhouse it has become. I think Windwalker is going to feel really good this season in Raid, and actually be a top competitor, with a lot of fights that just seem to line up well with all of our cooldowns. Mythic Plus, on the other hand, is definitely the weaker side of things. Although we have a ton of variety of builds for both hero talents, which are super competitive with one another, we're definitely going to struggle compared to other classes in the higher end difficulties. In that regard, it's going to feel quite similar to Season 1. Besides a few bugs here and there that have plagued us for a long time now, I think we're in a much healthier spot than we were in Season 1, and overall, I'm very happy with the direction we're being taken. Anyway, those are just some of my closing thoughts on the spec as a whole. I really hope this guide helps you, and you have a great time playing Windwalker this season. I've been Windwalker POV, you've been a great audience, and I'll catch you in the next one.